Whenever I have been wrecked, we had sailed as cheerily as you please. No 13s, no Fridays, no dead men in the hold. I believe it generally happens that way. I dare say you remember those two Benton boys that were so much alike? It is no wonder, for they were twin brothers. They shipped with us as boys on the old Boston Belle, when you were mate and I was before the mast. I was never quite sure which was which of those two, even then, and when they both had beards it was harder than ever to tell them apart. One was Jim, and the other was Jack. James Benton and John Benton. The only difference I could ever see was that one seemed to be rather more cheerful and inclined to talk than the other, but one couldn't even be sure of that. Perhaps they had moods. Anyhow, there was one of them that used to whistle when he was alone. He only knew one tune, and that was Nancy Lee, and the other didn't know any tune at all. But I may be mistaken about that, too. Perhaps they both knew it. Well, those two Benton boys turned up on board the Helen B. Jackson. They had been on half a dozen ships since the Boston Belle, and they had grown up, and were good seamen. They had reddish beards, and bright blue eyes, and freckled faces, and they were quiet fellows, good workmen on rigging, pretty willing, and both good men at the wheel. They managed to be in the same watch. It was the port watch on the Helen B., and that was mine, and I had great confidence in them both. If there was any job aloft that needed two hands, they were always the first to jump into the rigging. But that doesn't often happen on a fore and aft schooner. If it breezed up, and the jib topsail was to be taken in, they never minded a wetting, and they would be out at the bowsprit end before there was a hand at the downhaul. The men liked them for that, and because they didn't blow about what they could do. I remember one day in a reefing job, the downhaul parted and came down on deck from the peak of the spanker. When the weather moderated and we shook the reefs out, the downhaul was forgotten until we happened to think we might soon need it again. There was some sea on, and the boom was off, and the gaff was slamming. One of those Benton boys was at the wheel, and before I knew what he was doing, the other was out on the gaff with the end of the new downhaul, trying to reeve it through its block. The one who was steering watched him, and got as white as cheese. The other one was swinging about on the gaff end, and every time she rolled to leeward, he brought up with a jerk that would have sent anything but a monkey flying into space. But he didn't leave it until he had rove the new rope, and he got back all right. I think it was Jack at the wheel, the one that seemed more cheerful, the one that whistled Nancy Lee. He had rather have been doing the job himself than watch his brother do it, and he had a scared look. But he kept her as steady as he could in the swell, and he drew a long breath when Jim had worked his way back to the peak halyard block, and had something to hold on to. I think it was Jim. They had good togs, too, and they were neat and clean men in the forecastle. I knew they had nobody belonging to them ashore, no mother, no sisters, and no wives, but somehow they both looked as if a woman overhauled them now and then. I remember that they had one ditty bag between them, and they had a woman's thimble in it. One of the men said something about it to them, and they looked at each other, and one smiled, but the other didn't. Most of their clothes were alike, but they had one red guernsey between them. For some time I used to think it was always the same one that wore it, and I thought that might be a way to tell them apart. But then I heard one asking the other for it, and saying that the other had worn it last. So that was no sign either. The cook was a West Indiaman called James Lawley. His father had been hanged for putting lights in coconut trees where they